Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. We've recently just celebrated a new milestone. We've crossed over the 1,600 downloads. Thank you so much to everybody who's listened. And remember, starting a podcast can be so easy if you use Buzzsprout as your host. Now, for today, my guest is Nomhle Ngwenya. She's a 23-year-old South African studying at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. In this episode, she recalls her deep love for geography stemming from primary school. Nomhle had a dream about being a metrologist. Even though that dream did not come to pass, she still stayed in geography. Currently, she's a second-year PhD candidate in the School of Geography and Environmental Studies. Her research is based on how green bonds, which is an emerging climate finance, can be a financial mechanism for carbon capture and storage, otherwise known as CCS, here in South Africa. CCS has been identified as a key technology to mitigate high carbon emissions, especially for developing countries like South Africa, that is heavily reliant on fossil fuels. Secondly, in this discussion, we talk about the importance of science communication and how communication can get people engaged in STEM careers by utilizing the media and the use of its and using it to reach wide audiences without any geographic restrictions. We also talk about how she balances Nomhle as a PhD candidate and away from the PhD. Tune in to listen to this and so much more. Hi Nomhle, welcome to the show.
Hi, and thank you very much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you, and I can't wait for everybody to hear all about you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be part of your podcast, so thank you very much for also having me.
No, then let's get into it. So tell us a bit about yourself, Nomhle, where you're from, your age, and what degree you're currently pursuing.
Sure. So Nomhle is firstly a 23-year-old female, proudly African and very centered in my African identity, and who I am. I am currently based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I think first and foremost, Nomhle is I'm a daughter to my wonderful parents. I'm a friend. I consider myself a student of life because I'm always trying to learn and I'm always trying to get wisdom and I'm always trying, to be better. And I'm a global citizen. And being a global citizen means not just only being African, but keeping up with current events of what's happening across the world and globally. And I think that enriches your experience, but it also makes you connected to beyond where you are now, And I'm a PhD candidate at Wits University. So this is my second year of my PhD studies in geography and environmental sciences. And I am a proud Witsie for the 6th year running.
Oh man, fantastic. Nomhle, I love how you keep mentioning that you are a proud African, and that's something that you really identify with.
Yes.
And as a result, I just want us to talk a little bit about that, away from the science before we get into the nitty-gritties of who you are and your research. I know that you're an avid literature fan, specifically African literature. Can you just tell me briefly about one of your favorite books, if it's possible to just narrow it to one? And I know I'm putting you on the spot. And also why?
Sure.
Oh, okay, maybe two. Maybe not your favorite, but one that you read currently or recently, rather.
So this is quite a very tricky one for me because I alternate between your contemporary young African authors and more of your traditional older type of writing of African literature writing. But my favorite book is by Ben Okri. The Famished Road. So The Famished Road is actually a trilogy, but this is the first book that I think just truly, truly fascinated me, and fascinated me in the sense that I felt like it's a very deep book, but I felt like this is at a point in my life where I was ready to just indulge in such, you know. So basically, Ben Okri in The Famished Road, he basically explores, you know, the human condition and the meaning of life, of death, of love, of the possibilities and the endless possibilities we have as human beings. But within, I think, all these, you know, metaphors, he looks at post-colonial Africa, and he looks at, you know, the state of, you know, politics, the state of corruption and exploitation of Africans, even after independence. And I think that struck me so much because the main character, you know, we see the main character and he's stuck in poverty. But as he's stuck in poverty, he gets into this, I think, this realm, the spiritual realm, where we meet African mythology and where you just alternate between this perfect spiritual world where there's order and there isn't chaos. And so as much as it's very mystical, he goes into you know, he goes into this transformation of the spiritual and the natural world. And I think that's very fascinating because I think for a very long time, African literature has sort of been shunned. Our own African stories and our own African mythologies have been kept quiet. So I think Ben Okri is one of the first, I think, authors that I've read who's been able to bring this to life and to say that this is where we are, this is who we are, we have a history beyond what we know. And he just beautifully personifies it into reality. So I think that's definitely one of my favorite books.
Wow. You know, I love how passionate you are about the book. Clearly, it is one of your favorites. And hopefully somebody who's listening can also relate and or now is more interested and might actually go out and look for the book. So do check the book out. Now we're going to bring it back and we're going to get into you now. You know, so you mentioned you are a PhD candidate at Wits University in South Africa. So before all of that happened, I just want you to paint a picture for me on some of the influences that led you into the sciences. Was it a particular person? Was it something that happened? Or did, you know, sometimes science just happens to us? Or was that the case for you? Was that the case for you?
So I think it's very important for me to just, you know, bring, just highlight my upbringing. I mean, I was just raised by parents who literally just gave me the best and gave me the best platform and opened up, I think, so much to me at a very young age. One of my favorite subjects, and I think my parents encouraged me so much to pursue, I loved geography. And I remember loving geography from as early as primary. My first project was the water cycle. And it just fascinated me, just the whole stages of evaporation, transpiration, rainmaking. And I remember growing up, I think I was in grade 7. I was very determined that I was going to become a meteorologist. And so geography, a lot of people think it's just a social science, but geography is a science as well. And that was my first entrance into geography. I took it into high school, and I went through it even at university. So, I mean, you know, science also was hard, you know, and I think people don't understand how vigorous science is. It's a very vigorous subject. It requires time, it requires dedication. But I remember just going through all those instances where, regardless of whatever difficulties I was facing, it shaped me. It shaped my character as well. I became more resilient. I became more hardworking. And I was even more determined that this is actually a career that I want to be in, not only because there were so many opportunities within a STEM career, but because it was also shaping me and shaping my character as to who I am today. But basically, just to bring it back, geography was my first, I think, stumble upon a very beautiful journey into STEM.
Wow, fantastic. I actually relate with that story. I also love geography, and I also thought I wanted to be a meteorologist. You know, the whole thing of of the whole news thing. I was so fascinated by the people who read the weather. That was it for me. Like, I hadn't thought about this in a long time, so thank you for bringing that in. So I relate to that story so much. But anyway, so thank God for geography for bringing you where you are. I mean, look at you now. You are a second-year PhD candidate, and your research is actually based on how green bonds, which is an emerging climate finance, can be a financial mechanism for carbon capture and storage in South Africa. So that sounds like a bit of a mouthful for people who don't know what all of those terms are. So before you tell me what your research is, for me, I think I might have an idea in terms of what carbon capture is, but I want you to explain that and also explain to me, what are green bonds?
So I think just going back, let me just explain firstly in your first part of your question what carbon capture and storage is. So carbon capture and storage, also known as CCS, is a low-carbon technology in which large amounts of carbon emissions are captured from the atmosphere. They're transported and they're stored underground in geological basins. So there's specific geology where there are rocks that actually literally store carbon and capture it forever. So once this carbon is captured in a geological basin, it can't escape or it can't leak out. So there's specific mineral rocks that literally capture this carbon. And basically carbon capture and storage has been identified as a key technology in which it's going to be able to help a lot of developing countries and other countries to meet their climate goals. It's projected, the International Energy Agency projects that carbon capture and storage can literally capture more than 50% of the carbon emissions that are released into the atmosphere, and that is massive. So there is a lot of importance for this low carbon technology. So now going on to what green bonds are. Green bonds are an innovative financial instrument, right, where the proceeds are exclusively used to finance transformational climate and environmental projects. So basically, they mobilize resources from domestic and international capital markets, specifically for climate change adaptation and adaptation projects and other environmentally friendly projects. So now, green bonds, how they're very different from, they're not that different from conventional bonds, but that their unique characteristics is that these proceeds are invested in projects that generate environmental benefits. And the most fascinating thing about green bonds is this is the first time ever in the capital markets history that we've seen a bond instrument of this time. And this is because of the increasing investor awareness on the impacts of climate change. And investors have now taken up a stand and are now becoming more proactive in how can they use private capital and mobilize it to create change and ensure that there are environmental benefits from that. So in a nutshell, that is what CCS and green bonds are.
Wow, that's very interesting. I didn't even know that. I know that, like you said, that companies or are moving to be more conscious about the climate, but I didn't actually know that there are bonds specifically for that, which is really good. I mean, this is something that we need. Going forward. So that's fantastic. I just learned something. Thank you. So now we have a brief background on what those two terms are. I just now want you to explain your research. Okay, what is your research actually doing? And why you've touched briefly on why it's important, but I just want you to delve a little bit deeper on why it's so important for you to be doing the work that you're currently doing.
Sure. So just to give you a bit of context, South Africa is one of the highest carbon emitting countries in the world. And this is largely based on the fact that we are heavily reliant on coal mining. And as you know, coal it's an abundant reserve of fossil fuels. And a lot of developing countries are in the situation where we've just got a lot of fossil fuels. It's cheap, it's abundant. and why should we let it go to waste? But the problem with this is that fossil fuels release huge amounts of carbon emissions, and that has been the cause of global warming and climate change. But in the South African government space, they have been very proactive in ensuring that there are policies where we outline the different strategies of combating climate change and how importantly we're going to mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions. So in the National Development Plan of 2011, and also in the National Climate Change Strategy, carbon capture and storage has actually been identified as one of the key low-carbon technologies that can rapidly reduce our carbon emissions, especially since we are very dependent on coal mining. And by no means am I saying that renewable energy can't have the same impact, but I think at the state where South Africa is, where we're a developing country, we need a mix of various solutions, whether it be renewable energy, whether it be carbon capture and storage, whether it be hydrocarbons, because if we depend on one source of energy only, I foresee that that's going to be very detrimental. So now CCS has been, as much as it's been identified as a key low carbon technology, carbon capture and storage is highly, capital intensive. So you need large financial resources. And government funding is inadequate, especially in a time where we are, as a developing country, there are other top priorities. This could be healthcare, this could be education, this could be social development. Funding large, projects isn't really, especially projects like CCS, isn't really a top priority. So my research is investigating how can we use innovative climate finance mechanisms like green bonds, which have the potential of mobilizing private capital from huge investors, from asset management companies, to finance CCS, and to not only to finance CCS, but to finance it in a sustainable manner. And I think the importance of CCS is not just only the fact that it can, reduce large amounts of carbon emissions, but it can also be seen as a way for us, to meet our climate goals as stated in the Paris Agreement. So with the Paris Agreement, there's a lot of emphasis on ensuring that countries, ensure that there are measures in place to make sure that we do not exceed, our safe, temperatures of 1.5 degrees. And CCS can be crucial for that. But also CCS has the potential of, increasing skills development and skills in the country. But the whole value chain of CCS, from the capturing, from the transporting, from the storage, the whole value chain can create economic opportunities, especially in a time like this.
Wow, this is such fascinating research, and also sounds very, very, very important. And I think Nomhle, as I'm listening, and I'm sure somebody else who's listening, they can tell how well informed you are about this subject, and it's really exciting to have somebody to be really well informed. In fact, you're so well informed that you are in fact also a writer, and you've actually written articles, and you published opinion pieces in places such as the Daily Maverick and other outlets, which is fantastic, by the way, on these on this particular subject, which is fantastic, like I said. And why do you think it's important for you to disseminate this information and your research in these platforms, not only the typical academic platforms?
And I always tell myself and people this, that the most, I think, brilliant discoveries, right, are never known, because academia can sometimes be this club or the secret society where information only stays within the society and is never disseminated anywhere else. And once you... How can I say this? It's so important to communicate to people about your research in a manner where they can understand you without using fancy jargon. So you can explain what CCS, what green bonds is, to an average person, to a 50-year-old man who has never been to university, but when they read your stuff, they can actually understand what you're saying. Or to a high school student who's worried about, what am I going to do at university? And they read your research and they're like, wow, I actually want to explore this. And that's how you get people engaged in STEM careers, and that's how you get people very, very interested in what you're doing. And I think we live in a world where media is such a powerful platform, and you can reach a larger audience, without any geographical restrictions. So it's very important for me to not only just communicate to the academic society about what I'm doing and whatever novel discoveries I may make, but how do I also make sure that my research is relatable and that people who aren't even in STEM or don't even know what I'm doing, but when they can read my article, they can stay up to current events and they can actually understand, oh, this is what CCS is, this is what green bonds are, without even reading a journal, right? Definitely. So I think that's the power of just writing and communicating about your research, to make sure that it's easily accessible and easily available, so that people are educated and people are aware of what's going on in the world.
Definitely. I 100% agree with you that I think, like you said, academia can be a very closed society. But I think sometimes, to a lot of people's defense, it's that they don't know that there is a platform to communicate science in this manner. I know for me personally, I only recently found out that there's even a term called science communication. And I'm sure there's so many people who would love to communicate their science, but they just don't know how. So I think maybe it's to do that. And just speaking about academia as a whole, being an academic, like you said, that you're working on all of this type of information, you kind of center your identity on just being a master's student, a PhD student, or a postdoc student. It's very hard to separate your identity, you as Nomhle and you as a PhD student at Wits. Do you sometimes feel like you struggle with that you don't really quite know how to take yourself apart from your research? It actually just sometimes just consumes who you are as a person, that you even forget, like, do I actually have a life apart from that? And if so, how do you do it?
I think, and this is a very important question, and it's also a tough one, because when you are on a research journey, that research becomes you, in the sense. You wake up every day and there's a little, even if you want to, escape from it, there's always going to be a part like, oh my gosh, let me just read this journal, let me just research on this, And I think it's very important for you to first, it goes back to defining who are you, what is your purpose. So it's very important that you just define who you are beyond a PhD, because it's very important for me. I had to understand this immediately first day, that who am I beyond just a PhD student? Okay, cool, I'm a PhD student now, but once I get the doctorate, then, well, what then, So it was very important for me, and I think I've just been very lucky that I've been able to tune myself or plug myself into different things. So my love for yoga, African literature, and just having a good support structure in my life, that has been able to sort of help me to balance out uNomhle as the PhD candidate, and uNomhle as a friend, as the lover of books, as a yogi, master, wannabe. So it's very important that I think people just ask themselves, okay, cool, as much as I'm doing my master's, as much as I'm doing my PhD, who am I actually beyond this? And this is very important because, a lot of people, I think, get so clingy and attached to all these titles, like, oh, I've got a PhD in this, I've got a master's in this, I'm doctor, who. And at the end of the day, it's not about your academic achievements. It's not about your accolades. It's about who you are as a person. It's about what is your purpose in this life? What contributions are you going to make? So I think that keeps me grounded is when I sometimes get too bottled down, just to take a step back and actually just remind myself, who am I beyond just this PhD student?
Fantastic. But, I'm just going to throw a little spanner in the works, because some people can be like, hey, Nomhle, I went through the most for this PhD. So, of course, I'm going to call myself Dr. So-and-so, as not as I want to. So, I think I know what you're trying to say, but I think for those people who worked really hard for it, it's not easy. And I think sometimes we can't say, okay, forget who you are, your title. Your title is yours, boo. You did the work. Yes. Congratulations. Yes. We all know how hard it is. But you are right when you're saying that you have to define yourself beyond the PhD. Yes.
Don't get too bogged down on the title. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even from your previous answer, it's clear that you also have tried to find your identity apart from that. In fact, you're also very passionate about youth development and female empowerment. So quickly, tell me more about that.
Sure. So one of the things, and just relating to the whole fact of being a PhD student, is I've just, one of the huge gaps that I've noticed with being in academia and being in STEM is the lack of young female Africans in this field. And that's concerning for me. So you do get, it's not like there aren't, African females in the space, but they're older. And so the conversation is different and how we relate is different. And I think one of the barriers to young African women is these cultural and societal expectations that are placed upon us. It's so interesting how, if you're doing a PhD, I'm young, I'm doing a PhD at 23, and you get comments like, oh my gosh, you're going to threaten men, you can't be so educated, or things like, where do you think you're going to work, or when do you think you're going to settle down, and when you think you're going to have children, and it's all these expectations that are unnecessarily placed on us. And if you don't come from, and I feel like there's certain, there could be certain pressures of you need to be married at a certain age, you need to have children at a certain age, you need to do things at a certain age, or if your lobola hasn't been paid for you at a certain age, then there's something wrong with you. And it's like, I'm passionate about females using the platform and owning themselves and owning their education and fighting for what they believe in. And by no means am I saying that culture is bad or culture is wrong. No, culture is what we define as, and it's where we find our identity. But I'm passionate about females just having a voice, having a platform where we can also say, we are African women of the 21st century. Our lifestyles are different. What we want is different. And we want to shape our lives the way we see fit. It's not all about getting married. It's not all about having a family. What if I just want to be, a scientist who's making groundbreaking discoveries in my continent? So I think I'm very passionate just about, females, female empowerment, especially in the space where we just let go of societal and cultural expectations and we flourish in who we are, And in terms of youth development, coming in, also just encouraging, young people to enter into STEM careers. I think, and what a time to be alive, to be young, to be African, to be living in the African continent, where as much as there's so many African problems, with our research, with our careers, we can make groundbreaking discoveries that can, shape this continent forever.
Definitely.
And looking at, key policies such as, Africa's Agenda 2063, and literally the theme is the Africa we want. And how young people literally have the power and have the opportunities, to shape, this continent and to make such novel discoveries. I think that's something that we should never overlook. And that is truly something I'm passionate about. And young people entering into leadership positions. But leadership positions is not just entering to to control, but entering to make an impact, whether it's through creating more platforms for young people to be heard, for our issues also to be heard, amongst older leaders. So those female empowerment and youth empowerment are two great things that are very close to my heart. And I'm hoping that, as you know, in the future, I do get more sort of opportunities and exposure and how I can further engage in this and pursue my passion.
Wow, fantastic. I love it. And I can hear how passionate you are. And you speak about so many important things, especially about being a woman and the unnecessary expectations about being a young researcher in science.
And what irks me sometimes is, we celebrate so much on, these cultural and societal expectations, but the fact that you are young, that you are going for your education, you're going for what you want, and you're literally securing the bags, that necessarily isn't always celebrated. And so I think that we need really a transformational shift in that being young, being African, being female, being male, and pursuing your master's, pursuing your PhD, or even pursuing any degree, that on its own is a huge achievement. It's not just based on these societal and cultural barriers or expectations that are so placed on us.
Definitely. And Nomhle, I'm just going to bring it in because where you are in right now is fantastic for my last question. You've spoken about your passions and, like you said, the unnecessary expectations and just bringing in more young Black Africans into STEM. So then what advice would you give to somebody, or what advice do you give to the young Black male and especially the females who you interact with, who are interested in STEM and also specifically in your field,
Sure. So I think, first of all, the first thing that I think I'd like to just encourage, young African males or females, is to understand that you're not disadvantaged at all. There's so many opportunities. You just need to go out there and to find them. We need to get over this mindset of, STEM was never created for me or for a person of my color. No, things have changed and you need to go out and grab those opportunities. And it's very important for young people to understand that you are revolutionary. You yourself are enough. You're revolutionary. And if you work hard and if you find your passion, you will flourish. So another advice that I would give them is you need to do your research as well. You can't just pick any career that you want in STEM. For example, in climate change, in environmental sciences, in geography, in sustainability issues, these are broad issues. And within these different disciplines, there are even other sub-disciplines within. So it's very important for you to take initiative and to do your own research, find what it is you love and what you're passionate about and go for it. But also, I think another thing that I need to touch on is you need to be resilient. You need to be hardworking. This is not an easy field to pursue. Environmental sciences, geography, sustainability, it's male dominated. And I think as a female, you are expected to work twice as harder. And I think you just need to also develop a tough skin, because STEM, as much as STEM is wonderful, it also has its days where you're reminded of your race, you are reminded of your gender. So you need to take everything with a pinch of salt, but also fight for what you want. And lastly, to just, remind yourself, why are you here? What are you pursuing? What discovery do you want to make? What is your passion? If you are up for the challenge, it is going to be a long challenge. It's going to be tiring. It's going to be weary. But I promise the rewards would outweigh all the challenges that you may have. So I think that's the advice that I would love to give to young people. Anyone wanting to pursue environmental sciences, geography, sustainability, climate change, studies. Yeah.
Wow, Nomhle. Thank you so much. You are fantastic. The advice that you've given is Fantastic, and I hope the females, especially, they take it, and I think it goes. Some of this information can actually transcend gender and can transcend age as well. You know, these are all important things that sometimes maybe you, like you said, you forget if you're a postgrad and you're going through the most. You forget why you're here. So it's sometimes good to be reminded. And as somebody who's just has no idea, it's good to know that there are people like you who are passionate. And I think what you said about research is so important, so important. I think sometimes you need to take ownership. And in closing, about how you said that you need to go out and look for these opportunities. There's one saying that I recently heard, which I absolutely love, is that as people, you don't lack resources, you just lack resourcefulness. So you as a person need to be resourceful. You know, I mean, yes, you might not have the capital or the means or whatever, but is there somebody who you can talk to? Is there like something free you can find? There's just so many things that are easily available to us, thank God, because of the internet. So as a person, you need to be more resourceful instead of relying on the resources. So
just to touch on that, it's very important to also just think outside of the box, you know. Don't just go for the average. I mean, life has so many routes. Think outside the box. Go a path. I know this sounds so cliched, but a path that's never been traveled, because that's where you'll find your gifts and that's where you'll find so many mysteries. And I think it's also important that, you know, as you're pursuing a career in STEM, think about how innovative you can be. What is the link between, you know, STEM and business? What is the link between STEM and policy making? So it's important also, I think, for researchers to ask themselves those questions, that beyond just what I'm doing, what is out there? How can I influence how business leaders make the decisions, how leaders within government make the decisions? So it's about thinking out of the box as well, and being innovative in what you're pursuing.
Definitely. And that's a perfect note to end this interview on. Nomhle, it was lovely having you.
Thank you so much.
And you've taught us so much. You inspired us and you've challenged us as well. So I hope people do take all those things into consideration.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really, really do appreciate the platform to have shared my experiences and my views. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. And to everybody else who's listening, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to another episode of the Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. Until next time, bye.